Today on the big story.
Microplastic was found for the first time in the human system.
In human blood, right.
When you take a plastic mug and you heat water in it, for instance, in a microwave, that leads to degradation and the water has microplastics in it, which when you drink gets injected in your system.
How dangerous are those, or is it a big problem that we are not even looking at right now?
There has been studies that say that microplastics breach this blood-brain barrier.
The greatest source of plastic waste is cigarette butts. I never knew that.
People would be able to use plastics as they use it, but it would not cause as much harm to the environment as it causes now.
The views expressed in this podcast are the speaker's own. The Quint neither endorses nor is responsible for them.
Hello. Welcome to the big story.
Hello.
This is the fourth episode of the series, and today we are talking about the plastic that you and I are consuming.
This was actually supposed to be the first episode.
Yeah.
Right?
But life plays out.
differently.
So this is now the fourth episode. This is the fourth episode of the big story, and today we are talking about the plastic that you and I are consuming every day. And no, it's not Kurkure. It is actually...
It's Lay's.
Yeah, it's actually Lay's. Newsflash.
No.
Lay's
Lay's is just potato.
But do you know why Kurkure is... it was said that Kurkure has plastic.
Because it burns. Matlab it doesn't burn. ऐसा ही कुछ था ना?
No, it burns, but it burns exactly how plastic burns.
Okay. How does plastic burn? Have I burnt plastic? I haven't burned plastic.
Of course you have. You seem like a person who has burnt plastic. In the name of science experiment.
Yes. And I'm like a pyromaniac kind of a person. So I have 100%. It burns with different kinds of flames. Green, I've seen green flames, blue.
So that's
flames.
how Kurkure also burns. So people got very alarmed. They're like, oh my god, Kurkure has plastic. But it doesn't. But what does have plastic is everything else, including our bodies, which is what we're discussing today. So what we're talking about today essentially is microplastics.
Okay. And what is microplastics, Anjali?
So microplastics are just really tiny pieces of plastic. And recently what has come up in the news, or what our researchers have found, is that as plastic degrades, it becomes smaller and smaller, and now it is entering our bodies and it is now in our blood as well.
Yeah. There was a study that said it's the first time in human history that microplastic was found in our bloodstream, right?
Correct. Ever since this study was published, which was last year, the research interest in microplastics have shot up. Every alternate day, you'll see people discovering microplastics in different parts of our body.
Yeah, in something or the other, yeah. In tissue, in breast milk.
Yeah, and as much as we're studying of, where all it is in our bodies, more and more things are coming up how microplastic is generated. Like, if you recently heard that, how our single-use plastic bottles, if you use them again, there was a study that said that it has 10 times more.
10 times, 14 times, 40 times, kuch to aisa.
It has way more.
After a point, all of these 10 times and 20 times के number वो same ही होता है. तुम 10 times बोल लो या 40 times बोल लो, डर तो उतना ही लगेगा.
Yeah, I mean...
And which is where we come in, because we want to bring out the nuance between the 10 times versus 40 times versus whether this study was done on rats wala distinction, because as we have discussed many times on the big story, all studies are not the same.
What has been happening over the past year is you will see a lot of these alarming numbers being like, okay, it is found here, it is found there. Through this episode, we're trying to figure out, is it already an issue, and at what point should we really be concerned about it?
Any study that we see, we don't necessarily need to be alarmed. And I think that was the reason why we decided to do this episode, right? First of all, hota kya hai microplastics? And is the whole halla about plastics warranted? How much plastic should we stop using? How much plastics can we use, right? And we'll take a bi-pronged approach on this, because we have, this is where I introduce our guests. We have a climate journalist and we have a plastic researcher. Do we call them plastic researchers?
Researcher.
Just a researcher. Okay, we have a researcher. By the way, she also has a favorite plastic, which we talked about last time. Do you have a favorite plastic?
I don't have a favorite plastic. I have been conditioned to think plastics are bad.
Yeah. People, you guys tell us if you have a favorite plastic. But without wasting much more time, हम लोग बहुत करते हैं ना ऐसा? Why do we speak so much before we introduce our guests, Anjali?
I think we just go with the flow. And then we also think ये edit हो जाए.
ये part edit नहीं होगा. Yes.
इसलिए हम बोलते जाते हैं. But okay, so moving on to our guests. Our first guest today is Shreya Sharma. She is a researcher who is currently pursuing a master's in catalysis, chemistry and engineering from Imperial College in London.
Yes.
And she actually wrote a research paper titled Microplastic Profusion in Food and Drinking Water. Are microplastics becoming a macro problem?
Oh wow, what a nice
Very
title.
nice work on the title.
Yes. And along with her, we have Sadhika Tiwari, who is an ex-Quintee. She used to work with us as a climate journalist, and now she's working as a freelance climate journalist. She'll be telling us how these plastics have been such a huge part of our everyday lives, what kind of corporations are responsible for it, what can we do about it, because clearly plastic is a very big part of the climate problem, right? And for that we have Sadhika, and it'll be a nice chat.
Hi Sadhika. Hi Shreya.
Hello.
Hi guys. Hi everyone.
So Shreya, how's it going? How's your research going, first of all?
It's going fine. I think I'm progressing fine, and I'll talk more about my project later on, maybe.
Is it confidential right now that you can't talk about it?
I mean, research is always confidential, but I think it's more related to the topic that we're going to discuss today. So I think I'll bring it later.
Oh, you're building tension.
Yeah. Suspense.
Anjali, let us not build any more suspense.
Yeah. Before we get into more, deeper and more serious conversation, let us start very basic. First question to you, Shreya. You will never see this coming. What is a microplastic?
Oh, tough questions already.
So we already know about what plastics are. I think plastic is a very general term that we use in everyday life. So basically microplastics are tiny plastic beads, to be talking in a very general layman terms. They are basically fragments of fibers that become as the result of degradation, you can say. So there are two types of microplastics that are generally termed. One can be the primary microplastics and the other would be the secondary microplastics. So the primary microplastics include the microplastics that are being produced for commercial product development. So they can be found in our cosmetics or fishing nets, etc. And the secondary microplastics, as I was talking about, is the result of the degradation of the larger fragment of plastics that we see. So yeah.
The only distinction between like a plastic and microplastic that you're saying is the size, right? Like microplastic is like a much smaller form of a normal plastic.
Yes.
How small are we talking?
So there are different size range of microplastics. In general terms, we call everything microplastics, but to be very specific, like if I talk about in a very scientific term, microplastics come in the range of 1 to almost 5 millimeter range. There are different kind of plastics, and what is now the concerning factor is microplastics. Those are less than 5 millimeter in range, basically.
But like 5 millimeter is something that we can see, no?
We
can...
you can see it, definitely.
Okay.
And why is suddenly there a interest in microplastics? And was it always a area of study?
I think because the plastic production has been increasing. Like earlier, if I talk about, I think only synthetic plastic was something that we knew about. But now people know about both synthetic as well as natural plastic. So as the production of plastic is increasing, and I think it will double in the next few years. So I think as the production of plastic increasing, people are getting to know more about the pollution that plastic is causing.
Yeah.
And one of the concerning factor that everyone I think knows about, not just the scientists around, but I think everyone knows about is the contamination because of microplastics around in the environment.
I think before we started talking about, microplastics, the concern majorly that we had with plastic was that it doesn't go anywhere, and so it is harming our marine life and the animals around us. So a lot of our concern with plastic was restricted to animals before we found out that okay, in the form of microplastics, it can also enter our bodies and harm us. I think that is where the distinction came. Once we figured out that a form of plastic can harm us, that is when we all became very, हमारे से antenna खड़े हो गए.
And especially after that study came that microplastic was found for the first time in the human system.
In human blood, right.
I think that was what, in general, the world community थोड़ा सा attention में आ गया उससे.
Shreya, have we been studying microplastics for long? Like, how recent is this research?
I'm not sure how recent this is, but I am very sure about it that this is a very hot topic in research right now.
So if you can quickly explain for our listeners, how would something like microplastic enter the human system?
I think the first thing, as I was saying, would be studying about the oceans, because that is where our plastics are going altogether. But there are also studies now that say that not just the oceans, but also the fresh water and even the terrestrial environments that we live in, they also have microplastics. So the study now says that almost 80% of the microplastic contamination in the ocean actually is coming from the lands and the rivers as their main routes.
So, Shreya, like you mentioned, there are some plastics that are primary in nature, as in they are intentionally added to our products. So my question is to Sadhika, why are these added in the first place? Like, what purpose do microplastics serve?
So for instance, if you use a body scrub or a face scrub with microplastics in it, you'll realize that they're tiny crystals, right? That seamlessly roll on your body, and it's very difficult to find something that's as tiny and as smooth and can be made of some other material. The closest, maybe, which is why the next most popular scrub that we see is like an apricot, whatever, you crush the seed, so the texture to replicate that texture. But even then, the crystal is the smoothest, right? It's tiny and it's and even so, for instance, what we put in the toothpaste, the tiny square, the strip of sorts, almost invisible. All of these things are very hard to replicate in other materials, or exactly like we say in detergents again, to like scrub things and for also for aesthetic purposes, to look at a small tiny pink dot in like a big bowl of white stuff is just fun to look at, right? So which is why, and there is no other replacement. You can't replicate that with other material. But is it absolutely necessary? At least in these areas, it's not.
So did we not know it at the time when these things probably were being formulated that these will become a problem at one point?
But no, we don't work as a holistic nobody. So for instance, if the face wash industry, the cosmetic industry, one brand was trying to come up with a face scrub. The conversation in that boardroom, I'm sure nobody knew or gave two hoots about in the environment or what potentially how damaging microplastics can be or where all can they land up. In that meeting, I'm sure the conversation was around what can give you the best sort of non-abrasive, comfortable, smooth scrubbing experience on the face.
You're saying this is a general thing when products are being developed, environmental impact and all aren't given as much attention to.
I would like to believe brands are becoming increasingly a little more conscious because there's a market for it. And because you get enough credit and sort of you're appreciated, it helps you build a good goodwill in the market with your consumers if you're taking all of these things in consideration. But environment, if at all, has been a thought. The environmental impact of most decisions that the consumer sort of industry has taken, it's always been an afterthought. So what you have to do, you do, and then you realize ki chalo, now if we have to adjust other things, what are the other ways we can do it?
Yeah.
And here though we are talking about products that you have to sell. But it's true even for like bigger decisions that we take, right? Matlab, environment is an afterthought. Not just because you have to pass certain, you have to get certain clearances, get certain certificates. You're like, acha, theek hai, this we can't do. So how do we now make it just enough so it does not count as as we're flouting some. Correct.
Yeah.
So that's about it.
Interesting.
So when you talked about the secondary microplastics, right? It is what is unintentionally used to be larger plastic particles, but due to some processes, physical processes, it became degraded into microplastics. Correct? So can you tell us what some of these processes are?
Plastics can take hundred or thousands of years to decompose, that we are already aware of. But abiotic factors like wind or waves in the oceans, they actually act upon these plastic materials. That is how the plastics actually break down into smaller particles, as I was talking about different sizes of plastics. These basically small particles are actually carried away to different parts of our ecosystem that we are living in. It can be through the storms or through the water runoff or through the winds, as I was talking about. This is a gradual process. So the plastics that were transported to our oceans decades of years ago are now being decomposed into smaller particles and reaching us. The consequence of what we have done to the environment is what we are seeing right now.
So this is about the gradual process, but we've been hearing, and there have been a lot of reports that say that there are some processes that are much quicker. For example, just like heating our food in a plastic container or freezing something in a plastic container and then consuming it. So these are some quick processes that also lead to release of microplastics in our food or anything that we're eating or drinking. So are such processes also responsible for the creation of microplastics?
Yes, definitely. So all the plastic items that we are using, as you were talking about, the plastic containers that we use to carry our food, specifically the takeaway food that we get from the restaurants. So, and the plastic bottles that we use, if we heat the plastic container, we will never get to know if the plastic particles are actually degrading after a certain temperature and getting mixed with our food. We will never get to know.
Yeah, because we can't see it.
Yeah, but that is actually happening. Similarly, if you keep water in a plastic bottle for days, so if you get a new bottle, I think that is where you will get minimum amount of microplastics, because that bottle is new. But as the days pass, because of the conditions in the environment, the bottle also starts get degrading. We cannot see it from our eyes, but that is actually happening, and that is how microplastics are being generated in the water, and that is how it is getting in our body when we are consuming that water.
And is it only true for like single-use plastics, or even the more durable kind of plastic? Does this kind of degradation keep happening in those bottles as well?
Yes, so that can happen in any kind of plastic material that we are using. It does not depend on the kind of plastics that are being used to make up the material. Yeah.
Okay. Like we asked Shreya, there are certain processes that are leading to the degradation of plastic that we cannot see, and therefore we do not realize. So if Sadhika, you have a few more examples to add of certain processes that lead to degradation, but we are not really aware about it.
Yeah, so I feel the worst and the most popular actually, where this debate, and this was a long-standing debate also in the West, when you take a plastic mug or a bowl and you heat water in it, for instance, in a microwave, that leads to degradation, and the water has microplastics in it, which when you drink gets injected in your system. A plastic-made product, which is degrading with time and is releasing microplastics in the environment, suspending it in the particles, in dust, in the water that you drink, in the food that you eat, etc., etc. And that we are completely unaware of. The Tupperware, for instance, that you use, you put it in the fridge, you microwave it very frequently. Over time, it has to start happening.
I've also heard researchers talking about if you hit a plastic ball with a plastic bat, just the amount of microplastic released in the atmosphere because of that impact and the friction it creates, that is also something that happens, but like we just don't.
So it's very everything. It's a very slow process of erosion of sorts. So if you imagine something made like a rock, so a rock, if you keep touching it also, no, every day very gently, it is around, it's being functional, abrasion happens, and over a period of time you'll realize that the edges have smoothened out, it's probably getting smaller. So it's the same with plastics. Heat, exposure to just like a constant physical touch, basically just anything that ensures that the article is not in its native environment will lead to erosion.
So I've read, and it's commonly believed, that this pollution with plastics in general and even then microplastics, this is an irreversible pollution. So what does that mean?
So it is inside your body, it is inside infants who are now being born, it's in the air that you breathe, it's in the food that you eat, it's already happened. And it is so tiny that it's not like the plastic bag lying on the beach, right? You can't physically go pick it up and then be like, ho gaya saaf. Whatever is there. We can maybe ensure that in the future it doesn't happen, but that is also very, very difficult, because here we're talking about something that is very inadvertent with anything that has to do with plastic. And plastic is an intrinsic part of how we live. It's woven so deeply in our lifestyles. You're wearing, and in fact, I was just, on my way here, I was just looking it up. The greatest source of plastic waste is cigarette butts. I never knew that.
Yeah. And aren't you supposed to not burn plastic?
Yeah, apparently the plastic fibers, they're fibers made out of plastic, and that's the greatest source of plastic waste in the world. Like Earth as a planet, the most plastic waste that we generate, it comes from cigarette butts.
More than your plastic bottles and packaging, everything.
Yeah.
Sabse zyada. Interesting.
Shreya, as a researcher, do you also feel that we are at a point of no return? Like, will plastic never decompose?
As a researcher, I don't agree. Obviously, as Sadhika was saying, the damage that has already been done, we cannot go back. But I think as the progress is going on in the research, the plastic that we are synthesizing now, it comprises of both the synthetic material or the biodegradable material that has started to being synthesized. And as the research is progressing, I think we are moving towards an era that will be using plastics, but plastics will be degradable in a way that microplastics are not being generated. So definitely there is obviously a need to find out what will be the fate of the plastics that we are generating.
Shreya, I want to ask you one thing. I think the biggest problem with plastics is that they are non-recyclable and non-degradable, right?
They are recyclable, but not
They are
degradable.
recyclable, yes.
I mean, yeah, they're recyclable, but they don't decompose into the environment, right?
Yeah, that depends on the plastic.
So could you simply like explain to our listeners what makes plastic so non-degradable and so permanent in our system? Like the chemistry of it.
Yeah. So as I was talking about, depends on the plastic material in use. So the common plastic that we are talking about, or that everyone knows, is the polythene or the PET. That is a polyethylene terephthalate that is used in our plastic bottles. So that type of polymer is actually made of two carbons attached together.
Okay.
If in the smaller classes you have heard of covalent bond, so basically a carbon is attached to another carbon. So there is carbon-carbon linkage, and as well as there is presence of carbon-hydrogen linkage. So these type of bonds are actually very stable in nature. So it's very hard to break them. So that is why it is very difficult to actually degrade these kind of plastics. And also there are different kind of functional groups that makes the plastic material more degradable. So if we have that kind of plastic material which have similar functional groups, it tends to get degraded more easily in the environment, providing the right conditions to the plastic material. However, as I was talking about, if it
Our
has
PET plastic has these stable bonds, right?
Yes, a PET plastic or the normal polythene that we use, that we generally take from the grocery stores.
So I'm saying, considering we sort of find a way to produce plastic that is not damaging the environment at all, that is easy to degrade, and somehow we manage to replace or just use plastic, say, in things which are absolute long term and do not degrade. Imagining that ideal scenario, From where we stand right now, will we at any point ever have the capacity to just deal with the legacy waste?
I have to add to this question as well. As a researcher, Shreya, is the scientific community looking to now find a plastic alternative, or they are also looking to make the existing plastic, degradable and, deal with the existing waste as well? So it's related to what Sadhika was asking. Yeah.
I'll answer Sadhika's question first. So, as the legacy waste that has already been generated and is persistent into the environment, and I believe as a researcher, I'm being hopeful because of the research that is going on around me. As a researcher, as we find out answers to the questions on how plastic can be degraded efficiently, I think the plastic that is already present in the environment can be extracted and can be degraded into something that does not harm the environment. But definitely the waste or the pollution that has already been created in the environment, even if we kind of get a solution to the problem or kind of get a solution to degrading the plastic, we are actually not aware of what were the toxic chemicals that were used to make them. So even if we are even if we are able to degrade them, we don't know what will be the fate of the degradation. So definitely the legacy that we have already created cannot be undone. And then answering Pratik's question, I don't think I can tell you if the research is going on more in a particular area. I think it's very balanced because the research community is trying ways to degrade the plastic that is already in the environment, be it by recycling, be it by using different processes like incineration or pyrolysis, or using natural degradation to actually degrade the plastics. And on the other hand, the researchers are also trying to make a kind of plastic that will degrade in the environment after use, provided the right conditions. So if I talk about myself, I'm also working in the area currently where I'm trying to synthesize a plastic material that will eventually degrade in the environment and which will not cause any potential harm to the environment as well as the ecosystem it gets degraded in. So yeah, the research is very balanced, I believe.
So now that we've gone into a little more of a macro perspective on plastic and talking about the industry and everything, I think let's come back to our little tiny particles, which are the microplastics. If we move ahead, so till now we've discussed how they get formed and how they enter our environment in general. So if we move ahead in, let's call it the journey of microplastics, after it is dumped in the ocean, what happens next, Shreya?
Because it is actually accumulated in the oceans, the organisms that are in the ocean cannot actually make out whether it's food or whether it's something that will cause harm to them. So there are different organisms that actually rely on the oceans or seas for their food. They can be normal seabirds, the pelagic fishes, or the benthic fishes, so or the large kind of sharks or mollusks, different kind of animals that we know and that we know live in the oceans or the seas. So basically what happens is microplastics actually accumulate in the sea sediment surface first, and there are different kind of phytoplanktons that is present in the sea surface. So these phytoplanktons actually absorb the microplastics. These microplastics are actually present in their bodies, and as herbivorous animals eat these plants, the microplastics actually gets transported to their bodies, and as these are being eaten by different carnivorous animals and ultimately to the human beings. So that is how it is actually reaching the humans.
I have a small question about planktons. The plankton that we see, who is Mr. Crab's rival in SpongeBob, is he the same? Is he a phytoplankton or is he a different variety of plankton?
I think it's a phytoplankton.
उसी की वजह से हो रहा है सारा pollution.
Correct, because he's tiny, he's called Plankton, and he's green, and he sounded exactly like the character you
Yeah, I think it's a phytoplankton.
So Shreya, this is about how it travels up the food chain. But if somebody is a vegetarian, would you say they are safe from this microplastic?
And she's talking about me, by the way.
No. Even vegetarians are not safe.
Oh, then she's not talking about me.
Because we know that the production of food starts in the soil. So the kind of soil or the soil quality is actually very important, and we all know that to make or to produce food, we grow crops, and crops grow in the soil that use fertilizers. So there have been studies where microplastics have been observed in soils of different different terrestrial ecosystems. It has been found in both urban areas, industrial areas, as well as agricultural soils as well. So it's not just that we urban people, or we people living in the urban areas, are prone to these kind of microplastics by eating the fruits and vegetables that we get, but also the people living in the rural areas as well.
So basically, बहुत microplastic है life में.
Now that we've reached a point where, okay, microplastic has entered our body, now I think it's time to talk about, okay, once it's inside our body, what can it or what can it not do?
Yeah.
And so at this point, I would like to bring back the study that has started all of this discussion, is the study that found microplastics in the human blood for the first time. So now in this research, blood samples of 22 healthy adults were studied, and they found that microplastics were present in 17 of these adults' blood. So that is 80% of the sample population. So that means 80% out of all of us. I mean, I would assume it's like 100% of all of us who have microplastics in our blood. So my question to you, Shreya, is before this research, we knew that the microplastic is in our body, but it has been now found in our blood. So how significant is this discovery?
So to talk about it, I think we humans inhale a lot of foreign particles every day, and this we have been doing since the dawn of industrial revolution, I believe. So basically, what's the body's first response is to find a way to expel these foreign particles. So even though we were taking these foreign particles in, the body was trying ways to expel it out. So either through excretion, or if we take it through our nostrils, that is through the environment, if we are taking in microplastics. So the large particles of microplastics are being coughed out. So this is a normal tendency of our body to expel or to excrete out these kind of particles that we are inhaling in. So after the discovery of finding these microplastics inside the bloodstream, it became evident that some of the microplastics are not being expelled out, but are actually being accumulated inside our body organs. It can be different tissues or inside the bloodstream, transporting to different organs. So that is what was the relevance of the study. So basically, we were thinking that it is being expelled out, but no, it is not being. Some of them are actually being accumulated inside the body organs and tissues.
And do we have any research on what these microplastics might do to our body and different parts where they are found?
So the research is very scarce right now, because we don't have a definite answer to what would be the harm that these kind of accumulated microplastics inside our body organs or tissues can cause. But definitely something can be made out, as these particles are accumulated inside our body or inside our tissues and organs. They cause irritation inside the body as well, right? So this leads to a cascade of symptoms that arise in our body. So if a foreign particle is inside our body tends to, as I was saying, react to it and try to get rid of it, which results in a lot of symptoms that can result into inflammation.
At this point, you're saying this is like a hypothesis that is being proposed, but nothing is conclusive.
Yeah. For example, if I give you just one example, if the particles are accumulated inside the lung, it can cause lung irritation. Then it can also lead to dizziness, headache, asthma, and if the problem is very persistent and a lot of microplastics are accumulated, so it can further lead to cancer as well.
So for now, we can't say for sure that, okay, this will lead to that. But as much as we know about plastic and what's in it, this is what we can say. If it accumulates to a level, this is what it may lead to, right?
So basically, we don't know if the plastics that are accumulated are inert, that is, they are not causing any harm, or whether they are actually causing harm to a level that a immune response is being created inside the body, and the body is actually reacting to get rid away of the microplastics or the foreign particle inside the body, which is again causing different kind of symptoms like fibrosis or cancer in long term.
Shreya, I know you're not a medical researcher per se, but if you would have any information on what is the knowledge gap that because of which we are not able to, conclusively say what's the biggest issue in this field?
I'll give the answer in a more chemical aspect. I think the main issue with dealing with microplastic is it comes in a variety of shapes and variety of sizes and a variety of composition. So it is very funny. We are, if we are actually studying on one kind of microplastic, the microplastic that is being generated from the same material would actually be different. So if I'm studying about a microplastic that is being generated, say, from a PET bottle, and that microplastic is spherical in shape, the same material can generate another microplastic that is, say, rectangle in shape. Then my study changes. So we cannot actually say how a certain, if we know for sure that okay, this is how one material is reacting, we can find a way to eradicate that material inside from our body ecosystem at all. But if we don't know what the particle would be, we cannot future predict, no. So that is why I think from a chemical perspective it is difficult, I believe, in the medical arena as well, to actually find out a way. Yeah,
but Pratik, I also feel we can still maybe identify a couple of larger sources. For instance, we identify if this is the most common source, and then maybe do some research on that. But I feel a lot of research always in the world of science has been sponsored and pushed by corporate interests. And a lot of research is done where the money is at. And microplastic is so, we all understand, we've discussed so much about how pervasive it is. So clearly, I don't think there's a lot of money being put into also this research. Because it doesn't satisfy a lot of corporate interest.
Especially not for long enough, right? Because Shreya had mentioned that it's only now that it's become such a hot topic of research in.
But increasingly maybe so, because like I said, I think consumers drive, corporates drive research. But not as much. Not directly. It's a much oversimplified version. But I feel where once consumer interests become more sustainable, corporates would also want to sort of come up with things that are more sustainable.
Since we're talking about knowledge gaps, so I was reading a bit, and there's one point where scientists are really concerned is if microplastics can jump what is called the blood-brain barrier. So currently it has been found in our blood, but we can't say for sure if it's crossing that barrier and entering our brains, which is considered like a much bigger threat. So Shreya, can you tell us a little bit about what this barrier is, and have there been any research?
So I'll first tell the listeners about the blood-brain barrier. This barrier is actually a roadblock to different kind of microorganisms, different kind of bacteria, fungi, viruses that may be circulating inside the bloodstream. How these microplastics are transporting through the blood-brain barrier is actually a very hot topic and kind of very interesting. There has been studies that say that microplastics breach this blood-brain barrier. The scientists have found some kind of evidence in doing the studies with the mice. So basically, the microplastics, as they get accumulated, they negatively impact the microglial cells, so causing the cells to actually kill themselves due to the presence of these kind of foreign microplastics. There are different neurotoxicities that it can lead to. So it can definitely lead to change in hormones.
But this, you say, is in mice currently.
Yeah, this has been found in the mice. So we don't have as I was saying, the research is, we cannot say what will happen inside the human body.
And I think this is also because like the blood-brain barrier is not as permeable as the bloodstream, right? It's more restrictive. which is why it's considered that maybe microplastics are not able to cross that barrier. But I mean, there is one category of plastics that are even smaller than microplastics, which is nanoplastics, which we haven't.
ऐसा मत बोलो यार, अभी माइक्रोप्लास्टिक समझ में आ रहे थे, तुमने नया सिलेबस लगा दिया.
मतलब it's nothing like rocket. There's no rocket science about it. It's just तुम्हें लग रहा है इतना छोटा है माइक्रोप्लास्टिक, तो उससे भी छोटा प्लास्टिक है.
Nice.
Which is nanoplastic, which I don't know how much research has been done in this, which I'm pretty sure Shreya can answer. But because it is like even a millionth of a millimeter, that's so small. So we can expect nanoplastics to sort of cross this barrier, right? So how dangerous are those, or is it a big problem that we are not even looking at right now?
So nanoplastics are basically even smaller in size, as Anjali was saying. So the size can range from 1 to 1000 nanometers. And nanoplastics can be more dangerous, or I would say probably they are more dangerous. And that is because they are more reactive. And why they are more reactive is because as we go smaller in size, the surface to volume ratio increases, right? So as the surface to volume ratio increases, the reactivity also increases. So as they are more reactive, they can they can cause more harm.
But I mean, is there enough research being done on nanoplastics, or because they're so small that they're so hard to detect that we're not able to really
No, definitely research is being performed, and there has been a research I have read that nanoplastics are actually found to be absorbed through the skin. So yeah, definitely research is ongoing, but as I was saying, microplastics is such a hot topic, and it has actually become a hot topic very recently. So yeah, I think researchers would take a time to actually shift from microplastics to nanoplastics, but because the research has already been going on a kind of particle that is known as nanoparticles. So basically nanoparticles are of same size as the nanoplastics, but they are used for different purposes. So the research specifically in the plastic arena, or specifically in the material arena is going on concerning the nanoparticles. So I think a lot of research that is happening around the nanoparticles can be applied on nanoplastics as well. So yeah, something will definitely come up in the next few years.
Which brings me to one of our last questions before we talk about alternatives, obviously. So Shreya and Sadhika, is it possible in the world that we are living today for a person to, I mean, I'm pretty sure it can't be zero, but really limit their exposure to microplastics? What kind of a lifestyle does a person like that lead?
Nothing impossible, asambhav. Don't try. Just not happening. Just don't.
No, I think it can happen, but it depends.
Minimize kar loge yaar. It's just you have too many tensions in the world. Look at the politics of the country. Look at the दुनिया खत्म हो रही है. क्या पानी हवा में से microplastics हटाओगे?
So I think, talking in a very scientific manner, I think there is a specific science dedicated to this, that is social and behavioral sciences. And I think if I talk about the consumers in general, so their mentality and their decisions play a very important role in actually deciding this. And then there comes the role of the management of waste, as well as the waste removal. Then there comes the role of industries as well. So it's like a very broad field, but I think something will come up very soon. And I think people are, we as consumers are actually aware of these stuff even now. And as the world is moving more towards green technology, more towards green environment, I think soon there will be a time where we can talk about this topic in a more positive manner.
So what are some starting points that someone like me can keep in mind if I want to reduce my exposure to plastic?
Yeah, the most basic things I think is just to not eat or drink in anything plastic. That is doable. That's not expensive. That's sustainable as well. Just not carry your food in plastic. Don't microwave things in plastic. Remove all plastic from your kitchen. And if you can, don't buy things that come packaged in plastic.
So containers basically, right?
No, just all sorts of food packaging. So jo bhi khana, garam, even like if you're getting a takeaway, if it's hot food being put in a plastic bag, don't. Containers, utensils, food packaged in plastic at any stage in any form.
And if we have to like replace the current plastic that we're using, what are the most viable, sustainable alternatives to plastic that we have?
I will wait for Shreya to answer that because I literally thought of 3 things and I found problems with environmental impacts of all 3 and they're all not very nice.
Talking about alternative to plastic in general. So a person actually working in the area would say there are alternatives that are coming, and one would be more towards increasing the biodegradability of the plastic material. But definitely there are different kind of materials that can be used. For example, silicon is one, but it has its own demerits. I think every material has its own demerit. So coming from a materials background, I would say I would not go into the topic of what can be the alternative to plastics, but I would rather talk about if you give some more years to researchers, I think there will be a time very soon when people would be able to use plastics as they use it, but it would not cause as much harm to the environment as it causes now. And
so listeners, Shreya is just asking for some time. Thoda.
Yeah. Because I think there are different alternatives to plastic and I can list them all, but they have their own demerits. So
I thought of steel. Steel has severe impacts on the environment. I thought of glass. Glass has its impact. I thought of silicone. That has its impact. So I think, but as a consumer, if you have to make the switch, go for something that you can use for the longest time.
Go for something that is more natural because it is coming from the nature. It will go back to the nature. So I would say go for something that is more natural to the environment. I think switching to more natural sources.
Even that is slightly more expensive. For instance, if there's somebody who's listening to us who is like, okay, मैं अपना खाना plastic के डब्बे में office लेके जाता हूँ. What do I switch it up with? So then I think the best would be a steel ka dabba or or whatever you think you will use for the next 20 years.
Yeah, and maybe something that is recyclable as well. I am very well aware that recycling a material has its own disadvantages, and that can be discussed on later in some other podcast. But I think recycling is a very good alternative to a very good green future. So any material that is recyclable.
केले के पत्तों में रोटी बांध के ऑफिस लेके जाओ. Best alternative.
Yes.
I think we've found a good optimistic note to end this podcast on.
Just give people like Shreya some time. They are working very hard on a solution, and in the part 2 of this episode, we shall have Shreya again, where she's like, yes, I finally solved this.
We found it.
Yes.
Eureka.
Thank you, Sadhika.
Thank you for
Shreya,
joining us.
Hi, thanks for having
Thank
us.
you so much, guys, for actually doing this. And I think more people will be aware of microplastics now and the harm that is causing to the environment.
I mean, I didn't know honestly that इतनी देर तक plastic पे बात हो सकती थी, but clearly हम हो सकते.
There's a lot to talk about. Actually, it's one of those episodes where you listen to the whole thing and then you're like, oh, but I have more questions.
Dude, if these guys wouldn't have, because clearly Shreya has better things to do, like saving the world and making like a recyclable plastic and whatnot, and हमने उनसे थोड़ा सा time मांगा था, but definitely we're gonna have her again because I have questions, dude. Like, the first question is, let's imagine that we make a world which is free of plastics. Let's also imagine that हमारा पुराना भी सारा प्लास्टिक चला गया, नया भी जो बन रहा है वो भी all अच्छी क्वालिटी का है.
Sadhika is laughing in a corner right now, just by the way.
Yes, it's the word imagine is doing some really heavy lifting here. But yeah, let's just imagine the day after that change is made. What will happen to the corporations? What will happen to a lot of these other industries that use plastic. So what will be the more practical aspect of that change? Because that is like every time somebody talks about change in this aspect, itna status quo ban gaya plastic ki just imagining a change is like very weird for me, and I would definitely want to have like a 1 hour separate conversation with Sadhika about ye change aayega kaise.
और क्या कभी आएगा?
That is like
No, I mean it
क्या कभी
seems.
आएगा?
The thing is, we've also discussed, it has become such an inseparable part of our lives that it seems very utopian to imagine a world like that, where there is no plastic. But I think, like Shreya pointed out, as a material it really works, and it has some benefits which are very, very difficult to replicate in other materials. I agree with Shreya with the point that we should be looking at better plastics and not getting rid of all of them.
I also was thinking about this when Shreya was explaining the study that we had talked about. That isn't like a 22-person study. Doesn't it raise questions of a low sample size, and should these kind of studies be
done
like,
on a much, much bigger population?
Yeah,
But
exactly. Exactly.
This study, it is so widely discussed because it was the first
It was
one
the
of
first
its
study,
kind.
yeah.
Yeah, after that the sample sizes have increased, and this was like one study in one part of the world. Since that, the number of studies that have happened have taken into account a much bigger sample population, and the point is all of them are pointing towards the same thing, that there is plastic in our bodies, and the problem is getting worse. And I think what we didn't even get to discuss in detail but should be is what I came across a lot while I was reading about microplastics, was the problem of nanoplastics, because they're so tiny that it is very expensive to detect them, very expensive to study them. So we're not even doing that.
Also the blood-brain barrier, and
Yeah.
if what will happen if that barrier gets surpassed, right? तो
Yeah, so I
अलग
mean,
ही डर लग
these
रहा
are not just our questions, these are also the scientists' questions. This is where all the research knowledge gaps exist.
Yeah. And definitely I would say that as soon as some study or something comes up, and if Shreya sends us her path-breaking discoveries, we should be having an update on this episode, because this is one episode which definitely will have an update sometime in the future, right? And talking about the learnings that we had from this episode, I would say Sadhika's point of trying to cut plastic wherever you can in a more sustainable way, that really rings true, because for a year or so I have been conscious about the fact कि मैं कितना अपने around plastic use कर रहा हूँ, and that is something that is a conversation that can be had, because जब तक corporations कुछ करेंगी
तब तक तो देर हो जाएगी.
Yeah, and this is the most we can do. Is it the most we can do, or is it the least we can do? This is also a question that we shall discuss in part 2.
There is lesser that we can do, but I'm pretty sure.
There is lesser than we can do. Matlab, this is the most we can do, right?
You can obviously participate in policy discussions. You can, let your governments know that this is what you want. But more than that, at a very personal level, this is the most you can do. Collectively, of course, we can do more. But at personal level, cutting down plastic, recycling plastic, reusing it, actually, more than recycling is considered a better practice.
Also, this is like a personal anecdote. Like having a plastic-free life just smells better. Because you have that very distinct plastic smell, right? Whenever you have food in a plastic container, or whenever you have like a plastic toy or something. Not toy, I don't play with toys, guys. But
hard to believe.
Whenever you have like a plastic article, phone cover, etc., it has that smell. Very plasticky smell. But the more I have replaced, like as you can see, this is like a metal bottle and it doesn't have that plasticky smell. So if not for the climate, for the smell.
Do it for the smell. But I think with that we can conclude this episode.
Yes, let us conclude this episode.
It was a very fun, informative chat.
It was a very real discussion about something so plastic.
Wow. T-shirt line.
T-shirt, yes. If you want the Big Story merchandise, spam our comments saying merchandise dalo.
Sure.
Okay, so
Okay.
what are we talking about in the next episode, Anjali?
In the next episode, we are talking about.
थोड़ी education की बात करते हैं.
I think that's a good one.
Till where are you educated? कब तक पढ़े हो तुम?
कब तक पढ़ना चाहिए तुम्हें? और कब कह दो अब बस और नहीं पढ़ सकते.
Yeah, so basically in the next episode we're going to talk about education. हम अभी exact topic तो नहीं बताएंगे because the exact topic is very ऐसा. It's very interesting. You'll have fun. So stay tuned for it. And this was Prateek.
And this was Anjali.
And you were listening to The Big Story. The Big Story is a Quint original podcast executive produced by Shelly Walia and Ritu Kapoor. This episode was hosted, produced and edited by Anjali Palod and Prateek Lidhu. The episode contains theme music from BMG and a special thanks to our guests Sadhika Tiwari and Shreya Sharma. You were listening to the Quint's podcast.